Alrighty, welcome everybody. We're going to have some fun just talking a little bit about Git and how we can use it in the MERN stack. The cool thing is we've got lots of things ahead of us. There's going to be a ton of things that we're going to learn, but I've found that Git is one of those tools that, everybody says, well, you got to learn it and you got to use it and all these different things. But I want to point out that there's benefits to you. As you go through, if you learn how to use Git, that's not only advantageous for you when moving into the workforce, because most companies are slowly moving to Git or they're already there. The other thing is being able to tell where you have been and what you have changed. In the process of troubleshooting, sometimes you get so many files going on, you're trying to figure out, okay, I know I touched that file and I made a change, but what did I change and what was it originally? And that type of thing is actually really good for Git, because Git, if I make sure everything's working right now and I save it, I make a snapshot photo in a sense of every single file. And then I go and I start working and I'm changing some things around and I go, oh no, it's broken. What broke it? Well, typically I can find out roughly where it is based on the error that I see, but then I can go in to Git and I can say, oh, look, this looks like where it died. And it looks like I changed that one from this to this. And so it's a very helpful thing when I'm trying to narrow things down and figure out what ended up going wrong. So let's just start out. What I did is I have got a folder. As you can see, in my terminal right now, I'm using a thing called Git Bash. Now, Git Bash is on Windows, and it's very similar to what you'd find in the Mac terminal. And so what I want to do is just kind of show you a few things that I use in there, and this is how I go about it, all right? So the first thing that I did is I created a directory. And so I'll go ahead and do mkdir for making a directory. And I'm going to just call it MERN. Okay. Now I can go into MERN, just change directories into the MERN. And in here, if I do an ls-al, which is give me a file listing and include all of the hidden files and show me the full details. If I just do ls, you'll see that it doesn't show me any files. And that's because any file that starts with a dot is going to be hidden. And if I do have something in there, then it's going to be just the name of it. So ls space -al is something that I use all over the place. So as you're seeing me instructing and stuff, that's what it means. All right. So in here, we've got the ls-al. I can see that nothing's in there. And so I'm going to start with a git init. This sets up my folder here. This folder called MERN is now going to be a Git repository. I can save all of my files in here and track them and keep track of everything that I need. All right. And if I do my ls-al again, we can now see that there's this special folder called .git. But if I do an ls, it doesn't show. Anything starting with a dot is hidden. Now, that's going to keep track of a ton of information. And that's really good because I don't really care how it's done. If I want to, I can get into the nuts and bolts and I can really understand that Git folder. But all I need to know is if I see .git, when I do ls-al, that means this is a Git repository. And I can do a git status and it'll show me that I'm on the main branch right now, which is basically where you start. Everything goes here unless you decide to branch off and create a new one. But since you're working with yourself, you really don't need to do branches. It's totally up to you. We do have in the web fundamentals section an entire thing on Git, so we won't get too far into that. Now, having said that, I'm in here, I can see that I want to do some things, but with my VS Code, I can say code space and then a dot. And what this will do is this is going to open up my VS Code editor in this directory. And so with that, I'm into the right place. Now here, the first file I'm going to create is called .gitignore. .gitignore is a special file in Git, and it makes certain that anything that I include inside of the contents of this file will be intentionally skipped over. All right, now that's a pretty cool thing if you ask me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to another folder here, and I'm going to grab from my files, get in here. I'm going to go ahead and open up this .gitignore in here. This is one that it's going to work for just about everything that I could want. Very simply, inside of our MERN directories, regardless of how big or small our MERN projects are, we're always going to have this folder called node modules. Node modules is a whole bunch of files. We're talking thousands of files that get downloaded to give you that full functionality that just comes right out of the box when we do our creation of a brand new React project. We'll also see in the back end in our Express and Node and Mongo area where we'll use node modules as well. And those folders, they get downloaded from the internet. We don't need to have thousands of extra files saved into our stuff. And so we ignore those when we're dealing with Git. And so anybody who gets our code, if you were to download it onto a different computer, you can always get those node modules back with a simple command. Now there's other folders that we'll ignore, the .pnp and JS and coverage and build. All these things will be things that you'll kind of run into. .zip, I mean, you'll create .zips at times. If you're inside of a Mac, this .ds store is a file. .env files, we'll talk more about those when we get to the back end. This ESLint cache and all these files here that are having to do with logs, there's no sense in saving those because they aren't saving anything of value. They don't have usable code that we're going to deal with. And so all of these things get included into this .gitignore. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this right into the brand new file that I put here. And you can see that now I've got this. Very simple. I'll close out the one that I copied from. I close out this welcome screen, and now I can see here that my MERN directory has this one file. There's a little U next to it, and that little U is indicating that this file is not a part of my Git files yet. Anytime I create a new project or a new folder, it's going to get this U next to it, untracked. And all I have to do is come over. My source control on the left-hand side here will show me any files that I've changed. And I can see here my gitignore file is one that is changed. So all I have to do is come up here next to the number 1, just to the left of it, the plus sign will appear. If I'm not on the 1, it disappears. So I just come over across and I push on that plus, and it takes all the files that have changed and moves them into this staged area. This staged area is where I can say, hey, these are the things that I really want to get put into that snapshot photo. And with these in here, I can say, this is my message to myself. This message is something that I can add as much text as I want to, but I'll show you something. This is the first commit, and I am including the dot git ignore, uh-oh, it's telling me that I'm over. I've used too many characters. Well, that's okay, because I can just come back to get rid of that error message. And I just come back a little bit. I hit enter. It takes me to the next line. And I say dot git ignore file for my MERN projects. All right. So I can make as many lines as I want. It'll just complain if I go over the 50 characters that are allowed per line. And there's reasons for it. It's easiest just to say, oh, whatever, backspace, go to the next line, keep going, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now say, I click on this check mark here for commit. Now what that does is now is saved into my Git repository. So I come back to my terminal here. I'm in my MERN folder, and I can do a git log. Now a git log tells me every single commit that I've ever done for this repository. So I mean, I could do 50 commits tonight and it'll show me all 50 of them. And I don't have to commit one file at a time. I can commit 10 or 20 or 100 at one time. But the nice thing is this little number right here, it says commit and then a whole bunch of gobbledygook. That gobbledygook is a special number. It makes it so we can easily identify that specific change. Now you won't have to do anything fancy with that, but just so that you know, if I wanted to, I could come back 10 days later, I could come back to this commit and say, you know what, I need to change that one. And you can do it. But like I said, you probably won't need that. It's just keep it in your mind, because when you get into your group projects and algorithms, you may need it. So just, it's something that you can work with if you need to. All right. With this in place, I've got those things and I'm thinking, okay, I want to get this up to GitHub, right? So here I can come to my GitHub and I can create a brand new repository. So I'm going to call this repository MERN practice. All right. And MERN practice February 2021. I can call this whatever I want, just no spaces is the only requirement. Once I've got that, I say leave it as public. Now, this I do because when I go to send assignments in, I can actually just take and copy the URL for my GitHub and paste it in instead of having to zip up all the files and worry about being too big or there's a problem or whatever. I can just take a copy of the URL and say, there it is, go look. If it's private, I can't go and see it. And I don't have the time to check every single one of your assignments. Unfortunately, you guys are just one of two cohorts that I work with. So if you leave it public, then I can get out and I can look at the individual assignments. And if you just create a new folder for each assignment and send it up to GitHub, you just copy and paste the URL and move on. So much easier, let me tell you. And then when you're done with the class, you could always just mark it private. You keep all your code, it's still there for you, but nobody else has to have access to it. So with that, I'm not going to use any of these checkboxes. I've already created my git ignore for myself, and I'd rather not deal with the other stuff. So I'm just going to say create repository. All right. With that, it's kind of given me this quick setup. Well, yeah, that's kind of nifty, but I've already got my Git repository. I just need to connect it. So I come down to this where I'm pushing an existing repository from the command line. Now this is going to be just slightly different from what you see in the platform because they've decided to name things a little differently. If you notice, you know, there are things that will, different repositories that you'll look at where the branch is named master instead of main. And that's kind of legacy version. They've updated Git to rename things now. So if ever I'm saying it's the master branch, just remember that's my old approach that is now supposed to be main. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I can copy all 3 of those lines. And then I come over here and I paste it. And it'll run the first 2 lines. And then the 3rd line, I just hit enter. And what this does is it's going to take all the files that are in my repository and push them on up to GitHub. Now I have my own copy here. I've got my own copy up in GitHub, and that's something that everybody can see. Well, with that, I can come up and just click on my MERN Practice Feb 2021 repository link, and boom, there's my gitignore, along with my comment. It tells me how long ago, and I can click on this file, and I can look at the contents of this file. If I want to, I could go in and I can download the code right here. If I need to, I can do other things. But now this is up for the whole world to see. There are different ways. If you don't want this to be public and you want to talk with me, I can walk you through giving me alone access so that your assignments can be only viewed by me as we go through here. Now, with this in place, it's really kind of cool because now I can come back and I can start adding things. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to create a text file and say hello world.js, and I can say console.log hello Kevin, right? It's a really complicated file. I've just made a whole bunch of changes and it's been a ton of work. And now I can see that there's a debug lot file that was created. Well, I don't want a debug log file to be a part of my repository, but I don't want to have to try and skip everything either. So, okay, well, I can just come into my .gitignore and I can add a new file. And I'll just say debug.log. And I can save my .gitignore, and now wherever I see the word debug.log, it's going to skip it. You'll notice now that it's all grayed out and it's not even there anymore for Git to track. But now I have an M next to my gitignore file. That indicates that I've modified this file, and those changes are not yet a part, they aren't committed to my repository. And then I also have my untracked hello world JavaScript file. Well, back over here, I've got my little branching source control icon, and it shows me that I have 2 files that have changed, and I can see both of those files. Now, if I want to, I can add these one at a time, or I can come back up to this one and I can hit the plus here. If I accidentally put something up, I can use the minus. It says unstaged changes, and I can do the minus there. So since I want it here, I'm just going to grab all the files that I changed and say, hello world JS file is complete. All right. And I say, commit it. It's all working. So I want you to just kind of keep this in mind. It's all functional. I've been perfect in everything. I tested it. It's all solid. And then I come back and I make a change and I go ahead and I make a bunch of changes, right? And so sure enough, it checks out and says, oh, you got an M for modified. Okay, I'm gonna stage those changes. I made a bunch of me. All right, and I commit that guy. And you'll notice down here at the bottom of my VS Code editor, I've got this little circle and a 0 down and 2 up. And if I hover over it, it says that push 2 commits to origin main, meaning, hey, there's been 2 commits since you pushed it up to GitHub. And so all you have to do is you just have to push them. So I can do that 2 ways. I can come up here to the 3 dots and I can say push, or I can come down here to that little circle and the up and down arrow keys, and I can just click on this. I normally click on this right here, and it's like, hey, are you sure this is going to push and pull? Pull would be if somebody else made a change up in GitHub in the repository. Say I was working in a team, I would pull down those changes that I don't have yet, and I'd make sure that they were working first before I commit my stuff up there, because it's possible that we both made changes in a file that don't work well together. So it's my job as a developer to pull things down and make sure that when I push things into the code where everybody can see it and it affects everybody, when I push it, I need to make sure that I don't break anything. All right. So here, since I'm only dealing with myself, I say, okay, I'm going to push and pull. That's fine. And we'll see it here in just a second. It's going to say, at least it should say, okay, you'll notice here, the up and down arrow keys are gone, up and down arrows are gone. We're set. It's seen everything. All right, well, let's go ahead and say, here we're going to add in something. Instructor Kevin. All right, now I saved that file, and over here I can see that the file's been modified and I broke something, and you're sitting there going, oh, I can't remember what I changed. Well, I come back to my source control and I find in the list of files that I've changed the one that's broken. And if I click on it, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see 2 versions of this file. On the left is the one that was in the snapshot. Okay, it's kind of my original before I started making changes. And you'll see that the red line indicates that something got changed. Over on the other side is my new version, the one that I'm currently working with. And I can look at those 2 lines and I can say, oh, look, I can see exactly what changed. If you look at those colors, it's not only giving me a color on the line, but there's additional shading over the word instructor and a space. It's trying to highlight, and I'm hoping you guys can see that pretty good through Zoom, but it's trying to highlight that specific error for me and say, hey, this is what changed. And so if I'm looking for a bug, and I've been committing every time I know that things are working, then it's that much easier for me to say, oh, look, that's what changed. So that must be where I introduced the bug. So anytime we can shrink down that space of where to find a bug in our code, it's going to be huge for us. So with this, I could, if I want to, I can say, you know what, I'm going to right click on this line and I can do all sorts of different things, right? But one of the things I can do is I can revert the selected ranges. This is the one that a lot of people will use. Reverting a selected range puts it back to the original. And we don't have to do it to the whole file. We could do it just to this one piece. Now just remember, if you revert something, you don't get it back, okay? So just be sure that you want to revert it. Sometimes it's better to just comment out the code and put in the original through a copy and paste. So I could do that by just coming in here and I grab the original, I highlight it, I copy it, I come back to hello world, I say, this is the one that needs to be done. So I can comment that guy out and then I can paste in the original. And now I'm ready to go. Now, if you notice over here also next to my line numbers, I will have like a green or a blue mark in there. That's going to tell me also where I've changed since my last commit, the last time I created that snapshot. So if you can find this opportunity of, hey, things are working, I'm going to commit all that code. The next time I come through, it's easier for me to identify those changes. And so now I would have the new version and the old version, and I could make sure, okay, the old version did work. And so this is just some simple troubleshooting steps that I've found in the process of putting together, working on things. And you can see now this shaded line indicates, hey, that didn't exist before. And now it's a green line saying, hey, you added this. All right. Say we got it working again. Now we just click on the plus. We say fixed the bug. And then we click on our check mark. And we can click on our sync down at the bottom and we okay it. And then last but not least, we'll jump over into our GitHub here. And we can see we've got our git ignore from the previous one. But now, if I come up, I click on this refresh, and it gives me my hello world, my .git ignore. And if I ever want to, I can look at all sorts of things like fixed the bug. I can look at the file itself. And if I want to, I can do a lot more things with Git to know who changed this file, when did they change it, what commit was it put in so that I know exactly when and what was changed with that commit. There's a ton of things that Git will do for you, but this was an introduction just to say, this is a great way of doing it. Every time I go to create or every time I go to do a new assignment, create a new folder, all right? And so in here, we could look at the, let's see here. What's our first assignment? Our first assignment is hoist. Okay, so I'm going to do that over here. I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a folder called hoist. And in there, I can create a file called hoist.js. And now I can start coding. Okay. And the cool thing is I can add these files. I can just say in my hoist, just going to bring it up here. Here's my first one. I'm going to just paste it in. I'm going to do that. And now I have this. I can say hoist assignment completed. I save it. I sync it. I go back to my GitHub. I say, okay, here's my GitHub. I can even go to the hoist folder where all my files are and say, copy it and paste it into the assignment, and it's done. Instructor Kevin can come and find my code now, and he can work with it. So are there any questions about Git and how to do this? I will say, very important, creating a new folder for each assignment will make your life much better. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording here.